So the left wing has its own problem with anti-Semitism and the disregard of anti-Semitism. Well, I guess for those who, I'm sure most people are familiar with the term, but let's define the concept of intersectionality before we wade into this morass.
Okay, so intersectionality was this idea that was coined, or like really a framework for thinking about discrimination and oppression. And it was coined by this woman named Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. And she based it on this very interesting case which took place at General Motors, in which 5 Black women sued GM for hiring discrimination. And at the time that they sued, GM had jobs for Black men on the factory floor, and it had jobs for white women as secretaries. And this meant that these 5 Black women they weren't acceptable in either job. For one job, they were too female. For another, they were too Black. And so they kind of fell through the cracks because of these intersecting discriminations. So that idea in and of itself is very sound. And the idea that, some people can sort of be doubly blessed while some people can be doubly compromised, that, again, great idea. The problem is that in reality, intersectionality functions as a kind of caste system. And what I mean by that is, if you think about like Western civilization up until, 5 minutes ago, the caste system was clear. If you're a white, able-bodied, tall man that looks like, John Hamm, you're at the top of the food chain. And go down the line, the more disabled you are, or female you are, or gay, or, go down the line, the lower you are on the food chain. What intersectionality does is it reverses that caste system. It says that the John Hams of the world are at the bottom, and the people at the top are people that are transgender, people that are queer, people that are disabled, people that, and I can go on and on and on. And the more claim to victimhood you have, the higher you are in that caste system. Now, the place where it gets even worse and more damaging is the idea that the more claim you have to victimhood, in fact, the more claim you have to truth and morality, the more standing you have to even comment on topics. And this to me is, as anti-American as the idea that, that to have a certain skin color makes you more or less American. The idea that you are sort of condemned to the lane of your class or your station or even your religion, or that having a certain skin color means that you need to ascribe to a certain set of ideas, that to me is incompatible, frankly, with liberal democracy. And it is an idea that has taken tremendous hold over the political left, and increasingly you see it seeping into the mainstream of the Democratic Party.
Yeah, so I have a kind of a litmus test here, which can very quickly determine whether somebody is reachable by argument in the context of left-wing politics and this principle of intersectionality, because it even violates itself in many cases. And
totally.
The litmus test for me always is, what is someone's attitude toward Ayaan Hirsi Ali, if they know who she is? And I would just put it to you that if understanding her full story, you can't recognize that Ayaan is actually a feminist hero, there is something wrong with you. You have a totally incoherent moral worldview. This just became especially vivid to me. Actually, 2 days ago, my wife and I were at a talk that Ayaan was giving. And it was the first talk she'd given on a college campus in 3 years, ever since she was deplatformed at Brandeis. And there were 2 women behind us, 2 young women. I mean, they were probably college students, and they're probably 20. And they were grumbling about more or less everything Ayaan said. They weren't heckling, but every time Ayaan demurred from left-wing identity politics, under their breath and not so under their breath, you'd hear some kind of whinging comment from these girls. And it's important to point out that Ayaan had already run through her entire life story, which contains just astonishing abuse, from FGM onward. and she was talking about the abuse of her peers in school and in their families, physical abuse, sexual abuse, routinely visited upon these girls. And, Ayan is Somali, right, which apparently does not make her black enough to win intersectionality points here. But if you look at her story and what she's had to suffer and the kinds of threats she continues to get, I mean, you would have to find a transgender person from Mars who should have more intersectional points than Ayan. And yet, this is the kind of reception she gets from some pampered white chicks on a college campus. It really is, it's astonishing to me. And to take the whole picture of the worldview here, if you think, as these women certainly do, that someone like Brett Kavanaugh is a fucking monster, but you also think that a hijabi theocrat like Linda Sarsour is a feminist icon, and Ayan isn't, you really need a brain transplant. I mean, this doesn't run through ethically. This is the kind of black hole that is sucking everything into a state of moral confusion on the left.
Well, the example that I think about a lot is the way that someone like Megan Phelps Roper gets treated in the New Yorker, and I'm a big fan of hers. I'm excited for her new book.
Yeah.
She's, grew up in the Westboro Baptist Church as I don't even know if we can call it Christian, but as a Christian fundamentalist. They're the God,
a Christian cult.
the God who hates fags people. And then you look
Yeah.
at someone like Sarah Haider, who I'm looking forward to meeting in real life, who's Pakistani, former Muslim, outspoken atheist. Similar journey in a way out of religious fundamentalism. And yet she is either ignored, or when she's not ignored, she's smeared as somehow promoting Islamophobia. This to me is crazy. Like, these are the two very, very similarly situated people around my age, both women, both left fundamentalist religion. And yet one is valorized, I'm thrilled for her, and one is either ignored or demonized.
Yeah, I would add Yasmin Mohammed there, who I think just got deplatformed from Twitter, 2 days ago. She's been reinstated, but she got reinstated by, me DMing Jack and trying to figure out what the hell happened there, right? So and this is routine. I mean, every time someone interviews one of these women on their YouTube channel, their videos get demonetized just for talking to them. This is not just confused students on college campuses. This is the policy of tech companies and the way in which they're deranged by, campaigns of Islamist protest against people who are true feminists. I mean, again, this is how the feminism breaks down. If you're concerned about Me Too violations in the West, as you should be, then you have to have some sense of proportion when thinking about what it's like for women under Sharia law and suffering FGM and honor killings and the reality of real rape culture that exists throughout the Muslim world. Getting groped is not the same thing as getting a clitorectomy.
It's the insidiousness of the idea of who are we to judge. I remember running up against this wall again and again and again when I was a student in college, and it was honestly the thing that, if I can even use this language anymore, woke me up, literally. Because I remember getting into a debate with people who were smart, and we had heard a lecture. It was somehow adjacent. I don't think it was Ayan, but it was someone like that. And I remember having a conversation saying, well, guys, all people are created equal, but not all cultures are equally good at protecting people like me, people who are gay, people that are women, people that are disabled, people that are different, right? And literally that could not be said.
No.
And this was 15 years ago in college. I remember being in a course, I will never forget this, where widow burning was basically justified.
Right.
I'm serious. By a professor that was absolutely beloved. And, we were in the class and we were hearing about the evils of colonialism. And of course, there were many, many evils inflicted by colonialism. And yet, widow burning is never justified in my universe, ever. And that was the kind of thing, like that was the machine that you were being put through ideologically. And you really had to look elsewhere and fight hard to find other perspectives. But that was very much the norm, this kind of, cultural relativism. Who are we to judge?
Yeah.
Really should be sending me a drink to the room that I'm currently sitting in order to have this conversation.
Yeah, it's later over there. You merit a drink. So I have a fairly paradoxical position on Israel, and it's difficult to summarize. I
think I know it. I read it. I recently reread it.
I once released a podcast titled, I believe, "Why Don't I Ever Criticize Israel?" ? And the title was read as a claim that I never criticize Israel. It's one of the most poorly titled pieces I've ever put out, and so I got just a tsunami of hatred for never criticizing Israel, even though in the first sentences of the podcast I made it clear that I do criticize Israel and I criticize Judaism, and my support for Israel is, in one sense, unequivocal, and in another sense, non-existent, depending on what part of the conversation we're in. But let's get there. Just give me your position on Israel and how you differentiate criticism of Israel and even Zionism from anti-Semitism, and how those two things run together.
Okay, so first let's talk about sort of my baseline, which is, as a Jew who is deeply aware of what Jewish powerlessness means, most recently with the Holocaust, but really dig into any century, any place before that, and it's a similarly horrible picture. I feel immensely grateful to be alive during the Jewish return to power. And that's a hard thing to say in our era where power is something that's regarded as immoral and profane. But I think that the people who try and pretend that Jewish powerlessness and Jewish protection ever coexisted are revising history in a really, really dramatic way. So that is sort of my baseline position, that power with all of the horrible moral quandaries that it entails is better than powerlessness for the Jewish people. That said,
certainly, let me just kind of sign off on these items as you bring them over. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And we mentioned the SS St. Louis. So you have Jews fleeing the death camps of Europe, and you have them being denied entry and effectively denied survival in many cases by the rest of the world. That's an argument for the state of Israel. Even though I'm allergic to the idea of a state being organized around a religious identity on the basis of real estate claims made in a book imagined to have been dictated or inspired by the creator of the universe. And in a perfect world, I would want to see no states organized around that kind of identity politics. If ever there were a justification for one state being organized in this way, it's for the state of Israel. I mean, the Jews have been the object of murderous hatred for literally millennia and have been run out of every country that has been a country, practically, that had Jews in them for over the centuries. So I think Israel should be the last state of identity politics left standing if we manage to unwind that principle at some point in the future.
Yeah, I mean, just to like riff on that for a minute, I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think I have a commitment in any way to Israel being a Jewish state per se, but in order for it not to be that, we would need to see just an absolutely revolutionary sea change take place in the neighborhood where it is situated. Because it's not even just the Jewish experience. It's like, look at any other minority in the Middle East without the protection of an army. Look at the Yazidis, the Zoroastrians, the Christians of the Middle East, a story we never talk about. They're being literally driven from their cradle of civilization. Like, there will not be Christians in the Middle East a decade from now.
Yeah. Let's linger there for 1 second, because that's genuinely mysterious.